What's up, weirdos?
Hey yo,
Me? Shit. I got
she.
me a little something rolled. The lights are low, and we're about to chop it up with Abigail on the Manic Pixie Weirdo podcast.
Okay.
A safe space for weirdos of all shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds to relax and speak their piece.
Speak that
So
peace.
grab your glass of wine and grass the chief as I get off the mic so the main weirdo can speak. Peace.
Peace, God.
What is up, weirdos? You're listening to the Manic Weirdo. I'm Abigail, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about all the different kinds of relationships that we have in our lives. And this week, we are talking with Michael. Say hi and tell everybody a little bit about yourself and where they can find you.
Uh, hey, my name is Michael Motley, also known as Country Boy. I'm from the One Mic Black History Podcast. You can find a podcast at onemichistory.com. I'm also on Twitter at One Mic History or IG at One Mic underscore History. If you want to talk to me, reach out to me. I love talking to new people, especially about history and Black history in particular. So yeah, reach out to me and you can find all my content on my webpage.
Great. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me. I'm really excited. So, this week, we are talking about um, Juneteenth. Now, I don't really know a lot about this. I was introduced to this idea, to this holiday, to all of the things about um, this holiday through a television show, actually. And it was the first time that I'd ever heard it. It was a couple of years ago. But could you just go ahead and tell everybody like the history of Juneteenth and like what it actually is, what it means, and like what it represents?
Wow. Okay, so during the Civil War, slavery was the primary catalyst for the Civil War, but no one actually wanted to free any slaves. The North was fighting just to reunite the Union, and the South wanted to be a separate nation where they were free to practice slavery as they saw fit. So Abraham Lincoln wanted to do whatever it took to preserve the Union, and anything that helped the slave or help free Black people was just a byproduct of that. That went all the way up until 1862, where in 1862 he wrote the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It basically stated that if in January 1st, 1863, if you came back into the Union before that date, you would be able to keep your slaves. But after that date, all slaves in the Confederacy would be henceforth and forever free. Fast forward to January 1st, 1863, and the Emancipation Proclamation came into effect. The language kind of sucked because it meant that the slaves in the four border states, any place that was within the Union that had slaves, they stayed in slavery, and any place that was occupied um, by in the Confederacy, but occupied by the Union Army, would remain in slavery. So that meant about 500,000 Black people stayed enslaved even after the Emancipation Proclamation. This brings us to near the end of the war, which is June 19th, 1865. Texas was already the last bastion of slavery because it didn't see a huge Union presence and it didn't see a whole lot of fighting from within the Civil War. So a lot of slave owners had moved their slaves to Texas because they saw it as a bit of a stronghold for slavery. That ended when Gordon Granger, General Gordon Granger, showed up in Galveston, Texas, and basically gave Special Order Number Three. Special Order Number Three basically stated that all the slaves are free, and the contract between slave owner and master and slave was now between um, employer employee. All right. Now, slave owners had to figure out what they were going to do. So they basically were like, we can have two things. I can either wait, I can free my slaves right now, or I can wait to the next harvest and make sure I at least get one more crop out of this, or I could just wait for the Union Army to show up. So very few slave owners actually freed their slaves. There was a report of one lady named by the name of Katie Darling who stayed in slavery for 6 additional years, even after June 19th, 1865.
Oh
All
my
right.
goodness.
So during this time, it just hardly seemed like a reason to celebrate. It seems like it sucks. But the story about African Americans has always been a story about perseverance and about turning things that suck into something that's special and endearing to us. And this is the exact same story of Juneteenth. So this the setup, the prerequisite to Juneteenth is horrible, but they used to celebrate their emancipation. They used to call it Emancipation Day or Jubilee Day. They celebrated that the very next year in Texas in 1866. And from that point, they, even when they were prohibited from celebrating and banned from parks within Texas, they used to go near rivers or anywhere they could find to celebrate Juneteenth until they built up enough money to buy their own parks where they could start to celebrate Juneteenth on their own. This is accelerated around the turn of the century because that's the time of the Great Migration. The people of Texas would then move out of Texas and start moving to industrialized cities in whether that be Chicago or Detroit or New York or Washington or DC, and take the celebration of Juneteenth with them and spread that message across the country. During World War, around the time of uh, World War II and early civil rights. So this is probably around the 50s, 40s, 50s. People had slowed down celebrating Juneteenth. And the reason for that is because, and we talked about this story a little bit, but basically they didn't see a reason to celebrate their freedom from enslavement when they were still second class citizens in this country. It didn't make sense for us to be okay, for us to fight for our country, to die for our country, but I can't share the same water fountain as you. That didn't make sense. So a lot of blacks, especially people outside of Texas, had stopped celebrating Juneteenth. And this brings us up into the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King had already in 1963 he celebrated the March on Washington, and he always wanted to go back. So what ended up happening is he started the Poor People's Campaign after the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He wanted to go back and celebrate and do the March on Washington again. He had kind of shifted a little bit towards um, economic equality, away from civil rights, and more towards we need to focus on economic inequality. And this is what launches the Poor People Campaign. 1968, he passes away. He not passed away. He shot, he's assassinated. And Ralph Abernathy and his wife, Coretta Scott King, decided they were going to continue the Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign then linked Juneteenth with the Poor People's Campaign, and sorry, then linked the Poor People's Campaign with Juneteenth. And basically, what ended up happening is that 50,000 people showed up in in Washington D.C. to celebrate the Poor People's Campaign on Juneteenth. They linked the celebration of Juneteenth with the Poor People's Campaign, and it linked the freedom from enslavement with the freedom from economic inequality. They took they then
Oh,
took that
wow.
they then took that celebration and took that, very much like the Great Migration, back to their home states, and it reinvigorated Juneteenth. And so that when they went back, it sparked a whole new energy in Juneteenth. And by 1979, Texas had celebrated as a state observance. Soon after, 14 other states, including the District of Columbia, started celebrating. And then, most recently, during the protests of 2019, 2020, there was a new reinvigoration of Juneteenth, and wanted to celebrate Juneteenth and to talk about Juneteenth. And even with me, prior to 2019, I was either unaware or I was kind of aware of it, but we don't really celebrate that here. I'm in North Carolina. That was always kind of similar, and it's kind of like Kwanzaa, where I'm aware of this, but we don't really celebrate that over here. We don't really do that here. But after 2020, uh, Juneteenth kind of became a rallying cry for all African Americans. It was kind of the idea of, if and very much like Juneteenth, if one of us isn't free, then we all ain't free. So we all gonna rally around this holiday because this holiday is a representation of that. And while, and I'll be honest with you, none of us asked for this to be a federal holiday, and we would. I mean, I'm excited because this is what I do, but I like the idea of it becoming a federal holiday. I like the idea that every single year there's a holiday that you have to remind you of just how far we've come in this country and how far we have to go. Like every June 19th, you reminded of the fact that, oh yeah, this is the day that the black people in Galveston, Texas were free from enslavement in 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So yeah, it's a really interesting holiday, and its roots are terrible.
Oh, well, I think that there's a lot of that. A lot of like, I mean, like the George Washington Day or President's
You're
Day
right.
or whatever, like they're all rooted in like horrible, horrible things.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but we celebrate them
Yes.
for some, for whatever reason that may be. I hope that it is a joyous day and it is not um, celebrated as something that is like negative. I hope that is true. Am I
Yes.
wrong? Okay.
No, 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 no. It's a joy. It's a joyous occasion. Um, it ends up. It's funny because I talked about this the other day, but the celebrating of Juneteenth is like, even prior to black culture and the things that we do, it still feels like a really black holiday because even celebrations as far back, newspapers as far back as 1800s talked about the preparation of food and cookouts during Juneteenth. It was critical to the celebration. And I was like, that's exactly the sort of thing that we would do during a celebration of a holiday like Juneteenth. We would have a cookout and invite people over and have a good time. And probably, like, I feel like they would be playing spades. So, yes, it's
Oh,
a
that
very
makes me
joyous
hungry.
holiday.
Okay, okay. That's good. That makes me feel a little bit better. That it is celebrated and not, yeah, that it's celebrated and it's not like looked down upon. Um, So, what is your relationship with Juneteenth? You said that you're excited about it, that you're, like it's one of those things that you never really thought about before. Like, now that it is a like federal holiday, has your relationship with it changed, or are you
Oh,
like, do you have a tumultuous relationship with it? Do you have a positive relationship with it?
the relationship was, wow. Prior to 2019, there I didn't have one. We didn't celebrate it. I'd never really even really thought about it. And I remember the first time I heard it, and I was like, Juneteenth. Why do you talk like that? Why do you say it that way? Like, why don't you just call it June 19th and what it is? Um, but since then, since um 2020, 2019, I've felt a new reinvigoration, a new connection to the day. And I feel like the day, even if the day wasn't a federal holiday, um, I feel like I would have treated it as a federal holiday. Like this is something to be observed and something that we need to acknowledge. A lot of African Americans treat it as our Independence Day. We treat that as our July 4th because it's the day that we were free. July 4th is birth of a nation. But this is our Independence Day, and I can really get behind that. I really understand that thought process and the idea behind it because for for us, and like I was saying earlier, if one of us isn't free, none of us are free. Then this is basically what we're celebrating. We're celebrating the fact that not only did we 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the people of Galveston, Texas, and Texas as a whole were still enslaved. But look how far we come. Look what we've done since then. We need to remember that, remember where we come from, and remember how far we've come. And we're going to have a good time doing it. We're going to. And so this was, even if before it was a federal holiday, even like prior to last year, we were like, we're going to celebrate Juneteenth. We're going to have people over, and we're going to make a deal out of it.
um, So when I was like doing a little bit of research for this episode, I noticed that there were like colors that were associated with the holiday. Could
Hmm.
you talk a little bit about what those colors are and what they mean or what they represent?
Wow. So I have not I have not done a whole lot of research into the colors. I assumed that those colors had ties because they mimic the colors like the kind of how can I put this? They're kind of African colors, basically. And there's definitely using these colors basically to try to as a kind of black dysphoria to and our links back to Africa and tying that in to Juneteenth, even though the holiday is a African American experience, but it's still like this link, this dysphoria, this African dysphoria link back to Africa in its roots. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
while I don't know exactly what the colors represent, I when you look at it, this is the feeling that I get when I see it.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's cool. I'm cool with that. Um, so I I can't help but notice that there does seem to be a little bit of animosity towards like the holiday and that
Mhm.
and I'm not really sure what that stems from or where that comes from. Have you felt any of that and could you talk a little bit about it?
Wow. There is a lot of animosity towards the holiday, and this is odd because it comes from both. It comes from both sides. Um, the feeling basically from African Americans is that this was a holiday that we didn't ask for, that we didn't want, and
Mm.
that turning this into a national holiday basically opens it up for exploitation. It opens it up for the masses that will take this holiday and turn it into something that was special to us, and now we're making Juneteenth coffee mugs, and your boss is coming into work wearing a dashiki,
Oh my.
which is not that which hasn't happened. But I can see that because even most recently there have been Walmart got in trouble for having a Juneteenth ice cream. They also had Juneteenth plates and party favors. And even myself, I remarked that if I come to a party and you got Juneteenth plates, that we're going to square up because it's not that kind of holiday. It's not a corporate holiday. Like I there's a heavy pushback on making this into a corporate thing like they do with say like Valentine's Day, which is obviously a complete I mean it's a complete corporate holiday, but there's pushback on any type of thing like that doing that to Juneteenth. And and to their defense, I have they're gonna do what they do. Walmart's gonna do what they do. They're gonna find out, they're gonna see if Juneteenth ice cream has a market. They like Walmart's just being Walmart. I can't fault them for being Walmart, but what I can do on my end is tell you when you overstepped your bounds, and this ain't it. We're not eating your red velvet Juneteenth ice cream. It's weird. You should have made the butter pecan.
Is that your favorite ice cream?
Not only is that it my favorite ice cream, but butter pecan has a root, deep roots within the black community. There's and I'm pretty sure it's an urban legend that black people weren't able to eat vanilla ice cream, and that butter pecan was that substitute for that because we weren't allowed to eat vanilla ice cream. I'm pretty sure that's not true, but it kind of makes sense when you talk about it in terms of butter pecan seems like it's everybody's mother's grandmother's favorite ice cream. It's like that's all they ate. So when you come up with a Juneteenth ice cream, the first thing should come to your mind should have been butter pecan.
Full disclosure, I don't think I've ever had butter pecan ice cream.
Oh
Um,
man, you did try it. Just try it. Just try it. Try it and come back and like, you know what? That was the bomb.
okay, okay. I gotta get like a good one though. I can't get
Yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah,
We gotta get one of those the blue bonnet, bluebell.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Something good like that.
yeah.
Nothing like the great value or anything like
Ugh.
that.
Yeah, it gotta have those little bits in
Oh
it.
yeah. Ooh, that sounds good. Um, so I guess uh I guess I'm a little bit confused, I guess,
Mhm.
on what Juneteenth actually is. So is it actually a celebration of for like when when the slaves were actually free? Or is it more toward, is there more of a inclusivity sort of like vibe that was given to it, like when Martin Luther King Jr. with the Poor People's Campaign, where it's more of an economic thing,
So,
um, or is it
wow,
both?
it is at the root of it. See, because most people don't know about the Poor People's Campaign and Martin Luther King piece. That piece, even after they took Juneteenth back to their respective communities and started celebrating Juneteenth after the Poor People's Campaign, they didn't actually include the part about economic oppression. They just took the part where this is Juneteenth and this is a holiday that we now celebrate. So at the very root of Juneteenth, it's a celebration of freedom, the freedom from enslavement, on June 19th for the people, the slaves of Texas, specifically the slaves of Galveston, Texas, because this was the city that he marched into when he gave that special order number 3. So this is what people actually remember, and what they talk about when they're like Juneteenth is the day, like it was 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, which, even for the Emancipation Proclamation, that wasn't an instant appeal. Like when that happened, you weren't automatically free. No one was. Most of those slave owners waited for the Union Army to show up and free, they used to call them contraband, and free their contraband and take that contraband for them. So it wasn't just like in Texas where they weren't free on January 1st, 1863. It's a lot of people who weren't free at that point. And Juneteenth was just a celebration now that this is when everybody was free.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. That makes sense. I like that. That's cool. Okay. That makes me happy. Listeners, you can't hear or you can't see me, but you also, I mean, hopefully you can hear me. But when you said that about freeing contraband, the look of horror, I'm sure, on my
Yeah,
face. Oh my
yeah,
gosh. Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a story. The stories are all rough, but one thing I like to remember always is that our story is always a story of perseverance. It's always a story of like making the best out of a bad situation, and even Juneteenth is about that. It's about making the best out of a bad situation.
so how do you make the best out of bad situations?
Oh wow, I try. I try my best to see the good in situations. So when things seem like they're at their worst, I try to at least find the good in a situation, or remind myself that it could always be worse and probably has been worse even for me. Like I don't even have to look far. Just like, 'cause when you say it could be worse, sometimes you have a tendency to look outside yourself and look at other people that have it worse than yourself. But even in these situations, you most likely have a situation that was worse than this current situation that you're in. And you can just think back to that, like, oh man, this is the bad situation. But 2 years ago, I didn't have anything to eat. Like I remember an incident. We were me and my wife were supposed to go to Goldsboro to hang out with her family, and it snowed. We didn't go because it was supposed to snow. And it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas. It was one of the holidays where you eat. And on Thanksgiving Day, we had made no provisions as to what we were going to do. So we didn't have no food. We weren't prepared to have food. We weren't even supposed to be here. And it's like it is Thanksgiving Day or Christmas. I don't remember. And we sitting here hungry.
Oh
But
no.
I know it really sucked. My wife told me, and we tried to go find a place to eat, but everywhere was closed. I'm pretty sure it was um, Thanksgiving. Um, and she made a pact that we were never gonna do that again. But in the moment, I'm like, yo, how could it be worse than this? How could it be worse than
Oh
this?
yeah. Oh my
And
gosh.
and you think back on times where it was literally worse than this. And plus the fact it's never as bad as it seems, because later on that day, my mother called me and was like, "Hey, I'm cooking. Y'all want to come by? I was like, why weren't you the first person we called? Why didn't we check with you first? So yes, so we ended up it ended up working itself out as things tend to do, and so yeah, it was a good day.
Okay, so I'm gonna do sort of a side quest here. I guess we've already done one, but it's okay. That's kind of what we do here. So, how do you celebrate like Juneteenth? Like, how do you celebrate? How are you going to celebrate it? If you don't mind me asking, you don't have to share if it's
Oh
really
no, it's
personal.
nothing. It's nothing special. It's going to be one. I have an episode coming out about Juneteenth. I already have a Juneteenth episode, but I'm going to I remastered it uh recently because I felt like I had most recently I felt like I found my voice and that these episodes are better. They're getting better and I want to make every episode better. So I do have a new episode coming out about the story of Juneteenth. But as far as for me, we are most likely going to cook out. I don't think anybody celebrating is going to have a cookout where we can get together. Typically, this would be a celebration day or a reason to get together. And one thing about black folks is we don't need a reason to celebrate, but if we have a reason to celebrate, we typically going to take this and run with it. Oh, it's Juneteenth. Well, we're gonna cook out. Who cooking out? We're coming over. Let's do this. What you need from me? I'll bring some food. I'll bring the ice. So if no one is doing anything, and I'm gonna put my feelers out and find out whether or not anyone is having a celebration. If no one's doing anything, then we're definitely going to at least grill. And I know, the celebration usually calls for like you to eat strawberry soda, and to make special dishes. But I'm probably just gonna make hamburgers and hot dogs.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, it sounds like fun.
It does. We are going to take a short break and then we'll be back in just a second.
What is up, you guys? I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our sponsor for this episode, Newsly. It's an audio app for iOS and Android where they basically take articles from all over the world and all the trending topics that are on the web at any given moment, and it reads them to you in like a natural voice, like a human being would. It's basically the first time in the history of the internet where the entire web becomes listenable. It's really cool, you guys. They have all different kinds of articles from all different kinds of topics so that you can like stop scrolling and start listening, which I really love. You can follow all the, any topic, all the topics, whatever topic you want to talk about or listen about, from sports, science, Bitcoin, even the Kardashians, like everybody. They have all the latest articles and it reads them to you. So it's super easy. They also have podcasts, which is why I'm talking to you guys about it, because our podcast, along with podcasts from over 50 other countries, are on the app. So that's really, really cool. You can start listening there as well. You can download and use Newsly for free right now at www.newsly.me, or you can use this link in the description, and when you use the promo code P1X1EP0DCAST, that will give you a free month of premium subscription to Newsly. So go check it out, you guys. And thank you so much to Newsly for sponsoring this episode.
And we're back. Thank you so much, Mike, for coming and talking to us. We are talking about Juneteenth, and we just finished talking. I'm hungry now.
Yeah, right.
But we just finished talking about like how you celebrate, and I think that could you go into a little bit more detail just about the history of it? Like, so what is specific? Like you said, it was specifically Galveston, Texas,
Mhm,
where this occurred. Like this, because that was like the last place, I guess.
mhm.
Could you talk a little bit about that specifically? Like what happened on that day, and how everything sort of like came to be?
Okay. So on June 19th, 1865, General Gordon Granger showed up into Galveston, Texas. And I don't know what about Galveston, Texas, specifically is the reason why he was so, I mean, what made this special to any other place. And I'm assuming that he was going from place to place to place and freeing slaves and giving out and basically stating special order number 3. This is my assumption. The stories don't really tell what what he was doing prior to this, or whether or not Special Order Number 3 in Galveston, Texas, was the only one that he delivered. But basically, what the special order said was that um, that the slaves were henceforth and forever free, and that this contract between slaves and slave owners was, now that the contract between employer and employee. But also, it stated that you cannot, we will not survive by idleness. Basically, don't sit around and do nothing. Find something for yourself to do. Find work, go work, and don't follow us. This was a big thing for them, not to follow the army. Because what would happen during the Civil War when they would free contraband, they would follow the Union Army because they didn't know what to do with themselves. When you think about how South slavery was, how it went, by that time, the people that were enslaved were born enslaved. They don't know anything else but than this. It's not as if they were coming over in boats, because at that time it had been banned. So the slaves that you had here in the States, you only way you could get more slaves is by breeding them together and making more slaves. Because so most likely most of these slaves were born into slavery. So they don't know anything else other than this plantation and maybe the surrounding area. So where do you go? What do you do? Right? You follow the Union Army because they just freed you. And in some places, they would, when they would uh, 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 secure the plantation, and basically it would take the plantation from the slave owner. Some places they would allocate that land for the slaves and say, hey, this is now yours. You can have this land and cultivate it and live. Just don't follow us. um, so anyway, after that, slave owners had to immediately decide what they were going to do. They were decided, like, hey, are we going to immediately free them? Are we going to wait to the next harvest? What are we going to do? And if you were a slave at that time, you were well aware that not only of Special Order Number 3, and that Gordon Granger had freed the slaves in Texas, but you were aware of the Emancipation Proclamation. You just couldn't act on it, because people who acted on it during that time would end up at the end of a rope, right? So it was right after Special Order Number 3, a lot of slaves were lynched because they attempted to run away, because they thought this would instantly their freedom. And things did not immediately change. Most people, even after this, even after June 19th, worked until at least the next harvest. At least the next harvest, sometimes longer than that. Because there was no governing body to force you to free them. The Union Army had to show up and take them from you. This is how some people, somebody like Katie Darling, ended up enslaved for the next 6 years, because who was going to stop her?
Right, right. Um, so what was the general feel about it during something like Reconstruction?
Oh wow. So, man, during Reconstruction, there was a lot of whitewashing with regards to Juneteenth. The people of Texas wanted to wash over not only their defeats, but their atrocities that they had done. And this is why initially they started banning um, Black people from celebrating Juneteenth in public parks, because they did not want them celebrating a day, uh, uh, um, their freedom from enslavement 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. But also, during Reconstruction, the South was down bad. They were doing pretty poorly. Slavery was their chief export. They made most of their money through agriculture, and then slaves uh, uh, um, uh, uh, cultivating their fields. So when you take away their slaves, it wasn't like they were going to turn around and start tilling the fields themselves. So what happened was, especially with regards, I was telling you just a minute ago how they gave them land. Well, Andrew Johnson, what he did, when after Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson basically said that any land that had been taken from slave owners during Civil War would be given back to them. And this had a twofold effect because if I'm down bad, if I'm not going to cultivate these fields, if I need someone to rejuvenate my economy, I need free labor. I need people who are going to work for cheap. And I can't force you to do that if you have your own field and your own land. So if I take this land from you, now you are forced to work for me. And this is what happens to a lot of they used to call them freemen at the time because they technically weren't Americans at the time. They weren't Americans until the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment made slaves um, American citizens. Up until that point, they used to call them freedmen. So basically, they forced the freedmen back onto sometimes the same plantations they were working on, and they basically had labor contracts, which basically said that you would work for them for a year and you couldn't move around in that year. And if you did try to move around, that you would be put in prison, and then that later would turn into sharecropping, which ended up gave you a little bit more freedom as to what you could do with your resources because you just had to come up with the crops at the end of the season. There was a certain quota, and they would take a cut of that quota. But it still sucked. It was still cheap labor. It still sucked. You were still living on the same land that the person who just enslaved you owned, in a house, probably the same house that you were in. It wasn't a great thing at the time.
Right, right. So it doesn't sound like the feel of so what exactly did they do to whitewash Juneteenth during that period? Did they just try to completely erase it? Um, or was it something more along the lines of like, oh, that's like something different? Like I I don't really know how one goes about whitewashing because to me history is just history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Um, and so I don't know
So
how one does that, but like how did they go about doing that?
so one of the things, um, the funny things about history is that history is told by the winners, except for the Civil War, because the people of the South never really felt any real retribution for their atrocities. In any other civil war, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, but any other civil war, they would have made examples out of all of the leaders at the top, and most likely shot, killed, executed for being because it was treason. It's basically treason.
Hmm.
But that didn't happen. Basically, especially after Andrew Johnson came into power, it was a feeling of let's fold the South back into the Union as easily and as quickly as possible. And there was a small window of a resurgence of African Americans where they were getting elected to the House of Representatives and where they could vote. But by 1870, it was all back to business as usual. Back to grandfather clauses and voting poll taxes and any way that we can oppress the black vote. So at that point, they were free to whitewash the history as they saw fit. While they did not win the Civil War, by the late 1800s, they were free to tell the story as they saw fit. And at that point, they could say, "No, we're not celebrating that. That's not what we're talking about. The people from the Civil War were heroes. Your story isn't the right story. It's not the story that we're going to tell." So the only people who could really who knew the true story was, of course, the Union, people of the North, and the people in slavery. And this is why they celebrated Juneteenth because they wanted to preserve their version of the story. That and they weren't that far removed from it. They 1800s. People still remember what slavery was like.
Oh, that wasn't that long ago
No,
either,
no, it wasn't. It
which
really
is
wasn't.
yeah, which is really kind of terrifying. It is a little bit like I guess hearkening to think that like we've come to a place where we're sort of being able to recognize all of these things now.
Right,
Um, so that's I get, progress is progress, I guess, but progress cannot be for progress sake.
right.
Um, but I do think that there does need to be a little. I really appreciate you like talking about this because I do like the education like side of this. Um, Now, please tell me if I overstep my bounds here because
No, go
I
ahead.
am not. I'm very ignorant on this subject, and so I don't really know a lot.
Nah, that's fine.
Um, but so, was there? Is there a general feel about Juneteenth because it is sort of a celebration of like we have not like if we were free. Um, what about like because I know that like we never changed the rules basically, as far as like slavery is concerned. We just changed the rules that said that you couldn't own people, but we
Right.
never said, but we definitely didn't change slavery, and my proof of that is that the only thing that we changed within the law just said that you had to commit a crime first
Right.
and now but once you commit a crime then it's like all bets are off kind of a
Right.
thing, which is
Right.
how you get the military industrial complex and thing. Is there a little bit of a pushback on that because I know that there is such a large population of African Americans that are incarcerated? um like is there any pushback on that, or is it more just a celebration of like the historical side of this?
A lot of it, I mean, it's kind of twofold. There is a celebration side of it, but it does serve as a bit of a rallying cry for the activists among us who point to this and say that you know we're still not free, that slavery just took new forms, and they're not wrong. They're not wrong. Like when you start talking about, convict leasing or sharecropping, it just one form of cheap labor for another one. Like, yeah, we're not working for free. We're not working for free, but if you're in prison, they can basically do whatever they want. The 13th Amendment basically says in here that slavery is abolished unless you are incarcerated. Then hey, like you said, all bets are off. So a lot of um the social activists now use Juneteenth as a bit of a rallying cry and basically a point of stating that hey, we still aren't really free, and that I don't think they push back against the holiday because it's still a joyous a joyous celebration. So maybe now, since it's a federal holiday, but prior to it being a federal holiday and something that was mostly celebrated and talked about amongst African Americans, it wasn't really that pushback. Now that it's a federal holiday, there's been a little bit of pushback, mostly because we feel like it's being co-opted.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see that. Uh, so, okay, I kind of want to go on a little bit of a positive note too,
Mhm,
though.
mhm.
So what what is your favorite part about this being like a federal holiday? Are you happy about it being a federal holiday first, I guess? And then or are you like upset about it? Like, how do you feel about it?
So the historian in me was ecstatic. I thought it was awesome. It never occurred to me all of the ramifications that came with being a federal holiday, and that now that was something that was pretty localized to African Americans was now open to everybody, and what would come from that. Um, but I think it's amazing. I was really excited about that idea. It's the first federal holiday since 1983, and that was Martin Luther King Day. So it my initial reaction is that this is a joyous holiday and this is a great thing. I really, really like it. And even, like I said, the historian in me was like, oh, yeah, this is dope. This is exactly what we asked for. When I did my episode last year, I talked about how I thought it should be a federal holiday. And now it's happening.
That's so cool though. That's kind of, I mean, it's almost a little bit like prophetic if you think about it. And I think that it's almost fitting that it would come after Martin Luther King Jr. Day as well.
Right.
Um just based on the history that you have shared with us. I think that's really interesting and that's really cool. How did you like find out about like where did you get your sources? Like how did you find out about this?
Oh, wow.
And how did you discover like that this was part of like, you know, your culture and that sort of thing?
Wow, it was strange because I read about it initially in an article, and it was around June 19th, and it was some buzz. It was not a whole lot of buzz, but I heard some people talking about, um, you know, Juneteenth, June 19th. We celebrate our independence, and this prompted me to go and start looking and reading articles. This is long before I had a podcast. Just reading articles, and I was like, this is a really interesting day and a really interesting thing that they celebrate. And it's amazing to me that this celebration has stood the test of time because this is over 100 years old. Like, why would you still be in 2020? Why are you still celebrating the day of your freedom from enslavement in June 19th, 1865? Not that you shouldn't, but how did you make it this far? Like, how did you get here? Like, I don't do I don't do the same thing I did last year. Like, I don't,
Me either.
and so the idea that you're still celebrating something that is 100 plus years old is amazing to me, that you were able to keep this celebration from generation to generation and pass this down, and that the subsequent generations still celebrated this holiday. And not only did they celebrate this holiday, but they took it to other places and new places. That's amazing. It's amazing that this happened.
Does it make you like how does it make you feel that like it's sort of like a time capsule almost of this like historical moment like of this historical moment in time?
And this is and that's exactly the reason why I love this holiday so much, because it is in a time we talk about, CRT and the banning of books and things like that. We have a holiday that forces people to shine a light on not just the atrocities, but not just atrocities, not just how far we come, but the history of exactly why Juneteenth exists, and the fact that every single year you're reminded of this. It is fundamentally a time capsule, and it's awesome. And that's the reason why I love it so much, because every single year you're reminded. The United States is reminded of the United States' people are reminded of what happened on that day in June 19th, 1865. That's great. It's great. It's a Once again, the historian in me loves it.
I love that you're so excited and just very like passionate and enthusiastic and it's like really I could just feel like your energy and it's really really positive and uplifting. Um so I guess I have like two more questions for you and then I
Yep.
promise I won't keep you any longer.
No worries.
um um so do you have any hopes for the holiday? Like, do you hope that it like raises awareness? Do you hope that like more people learn about it? Like, do you have any hopes or like aspirations for the holiday? Or are you really at this point just sort of like just excited that like it is that time capsule for African Americans?
I'm excited for the day. I don't really know where you can go from here. My chief concern is that it will turn into another just generic corporate holiday where people are wearing Juneteenth t-shirts when they have no idea about the history of it. It's just something that we celebrate because we get the day off, and you get on Facebook or Twitter and you say your generic Happy Juneteenth Day, and then you go about your day and you don't understand the reasons behind the sacrifices behind it. That that is a concern of mine, and I hope that people continuously push back against that. And every single year that we're reminding people of exactly why we celebrate Juneteenth. And to that point, Juneteenth has lasted this long with exactly that sort of thing, with people passing down that tradition from year to year, and we're still talking about those roots. So I know that it's possible because we made it this far. As far as uh, me, I hope that people continue to celebrate it with the same vigor that they did in the past. Like, I don't want you to change a thing. I want you to be just as excited about Juneteenth before it's a federal holiday that it is right now. And that anytime a corporate entity tries to turn this into a corporate holiday, that we're going to continue to push back against it, and we're going to keep this in its natural state. And I know that's not realistic, but we're going to still continue to fight.
um, okay, I lied. I have two more questions now. I guess how do so I'm white for those of you that don't know. Um, how is there a way that we can show appreciation and show support on this day? Or is this really need to be something that we sort of love from afar?
Oh wow, that is a great question because I so while this is a primarily a African American holiday, I think the knowledge that knowledge transfer of what happened during that day is the best thing that you can do. I remember I was talking to my man Dan Felton from this sort of goods, and he asked me about Tulsa Massacre because he did the Tulsa Massacre episode, and I casually mentioned on a couple of the podcasts that I was like, that was really important, but I feel like this story needs to be told by a person of color. That is not taken away from anything that he did. I felt like this was something that I should do, that I needed to pick up and do. And when we talked, he asked me, he was like, was I wrong for doing it? I was like, absolutely not, because the story needed to be told from everybody. It needed to be told from all sides. Everybody is not going to listen to me. So the fact that you can tell that story, people can listen to you tell that story, there is value in that. And it's the same thing with Juneteenth. There is value in everyone telling the story of Juneteenth and that history behind it, and how we got to this point. Now, you may not have to celebrate it. You don't have to drink, strawberry soda on June 19th or have a cookout, but that knowledge and that knowledge transfer of, hey, this is what happened on that day. This is why this is a federal holiday. This is why this is important. That's invaluable.
Okay. We can do that. I can do that. I can definitely do that. Okay, my last question for you. What inspires you and what do you hope to inspire for in others?
Wow. Wow. I'm inspired by people that are passionate about what they do. I love people who give 100% into everything or what they do, and I love when you can see that manifested in their work. This is why I one of the reasons why I love Twitter and the podcasting community within Twitter, because I see people who have all these different genres and things that they're doing, and they're all 100% all in and passionate about it. We're not doing this for the money. We're not doing this because we're going to end up Joe Rogan. We're doing this because we love it. And seeing that can't help but inspire me to make better content, to be better at what I do and telling these Black history stories. So for me, I am 100% all in on telling historical stories, Black history in general, but specifically Black history. This is what inspires me when I'm reading about things. I have no and it's not just Black history; it's general knowledge in general. But I have to say something. When someone says something and I like, oh, I know something about that, it has to come out. And this is exactly how I got started in Black history, because I started learning about more about Black history. And then I felt like I need to tell someone. Someone needs to hear these stories. So they ended up with me creating a podcast where I continuously, tell stories and educate people, and it's a learning process. I'm not a guy with a PhD. I'm not a guy with the master's in history. I'm just a guy who, day jobs in tech, and then at night, studies and reads and articles and books, and then turns that into, 20-minute episodes.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking with us. I really, really appreciate you doing that. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Wow. You can reach out. You can find me at onemichistory.com. I post all my content there. I'm also on YouTube at One Mic History. Please go check out my videos. I create videos for each and every one of my episodes. I'm also on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at One Mic History. I'm also on IG, Facebook. All of those are One Mic History. Please reach out to me. I love talking to new people. I love talking about history in general. I love talking about Black history. And I have an intelligent speech conference coming up where we're going to be talking about the rise and fall of the Black Panther Party. That is June 25th. So I would love for you guys to come and join me. It's going to be amazing.
Oh, wow. I'm definitely going to have to check that out. That's going to be really good. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with me. I really, really appreciate it. I'm definitely going to have to get you back on to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation in more depth and the Civil War and all. I love history too. So I'm going to have to get you on to talk about all the kinds of things.
I would love to. I would love to.
If you liked what I said, if you didn't like what I said, if you liked what you heard, if you didn't like what you hear, any of those things, if you just want to reach out, you can email me at manicpixieweirdo@protonmail.com. You can also check out our website at manicpixieweirdo.podcast.com. You can reach out to me on Twitter, as always, at mpweirdo.podcast. The Twitter or the Instagram and the TikTok are the same, the_main_weirdo1. Thank you guys so much for listening. And thank you so much, Michael, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. And as always, guys, be kind and stay weird. Have a good one.